Though they are no longer AFC rivals when the Seahawks and the Dolphins battle this Sunday, it's going to be a reunion of sorts, especially for the linebacker position at Lumen Field. We're going to be taking a close look at Jerome Baker versus Jordyn Brooks and how Connor Williams is holding up so far in his journey from Miami to Seattle. It's a jam-packed Tuesday episode coming on Locked On Seahawks.
You are Locked On Seahawks, your daily Seattle Seahawks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Greetings, 12. This is Corbin Smith, host of the Locked On Seahawks podcast, your daily Seahawks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Glad to be joined, as always, by my co-host in crime, Rob Rang. And a special thanks to each and every one of the 12s out there. Thank you, as always, for making Locked On Seahawks your first listen 5 days a week. Whether you're listening down in Vancouver, Washington, or in Havana, Cuba, we greatly appreciate each and every one of you. The Seahawks have turned the page from their thrilling overtime win against the Patriots, and now it's on to the Miami Dolphins. Maybe not a familiar foe in terms of the divisions that they play in now. Used to play a lot when they were both in the AFC, but there's quite a bit of familiarity. It's going to be a reunion of sorts. We'll be diving into that. Plus, we've got our final takeaways from this weekend on Tell the Truth Tuesday, and we'll pull back the curtain and take a look at the Miami Dolphins, who have had plenty of reasons to be in the news, unfortunately, here in the last couple of days down in South Beach. This episode is brought your way by FanDuel. Now through September 22nd, all FanDuel customers can bet $5 and get a 3-week free trial of NFL Sunday Ticket from YouTube and YouTube TV. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. Now for your lead story here on our Tuesday edition of Locked On Seahawks. The Seahawks and Dolphins used to play quite a bit when they were both in the AFC. There's the memorable mid-'80s playoff matchup. The Seahawks got the upset against the Dolphins down in Miami. And of course, 1999, Dan Marino's final run, the Miami Dolphins came to the Kingdome and won that game in the wild card round. So there is some ill will here, but it's been a long time since they were division rivals. Nonetheless, there is going to be a lot of familiarity at Lumen Field because the Seahawks have a couple former Dolphins and the Dolphins have a significant former Seahawk. They had a linebacker swap. Jordyn Brooks now down in South Beach. Jerome Baker playing in the Pacific Northwest. Connor Williams is snapping the ball to Geno Smith. So it is going to be more of a reunion than you usually see when an AFC East foe flies all the way out to the Pacific Northwest, Rob, starting with that linebacker swap.
Yeah, and that is one of the absolute fascinating things about this game, Corbin, is as you mentioned, I mean, it's very rare the Seahawks play the Miami Dolphins. Last time was in 2020, and, the Seahawks starting quarterback at that point was Russell Wilson, and their leading rusher was Chris Carson. Actually, Greg Olsen, now a compatriot of mine at Fox Sports, and doing a little bit of play-by-play. He was Seattle's leading receiver in that game, at least in terms of reception. So it's only been 4 years, but 4 years in the NFL is an eternity. And so what it really comes down to is, as you mentioned, I mean, this is kind of a reunion of sorts. Of course, the Seahawks have Jerome Baker at the linebacker position. They have the center and Connor Williams. The Dolphins now are featuring, a former first-round pick by the Seahawks in Jordyn Brooks, the linebacker position, who set a league record for tackles a couple of years ago for the Seahawks. This is going to be a really fun matchup, and not just because of the fact that there is a great deal of familiarity, but you kind of hinted at it. The Miami Dolphins have been very much in the news because of the unfortunate circumstances surrounding Tua Tagovailoa, their quarterback. Skylar Thompson is now going to be the Dolphins starting quarterback. It was announced today that Tua is going to be placed on the IR, so there is zero chance that he is going to be available for the Dolphins in this matchup against the Seahawks in Week 3. So that, to me, is really where the conversation begins.
Yeah, unfortunately, there's been a lot of discussion about out there. I mean, for Tagovailoa, this is the third concussion that he has had in the last couple of seasons. And so now you've got questions about whether or not he should play again. And we'll see what ends up happening. The Dolphins are doing the right thing here and making sure that they take their time. He's got to miss at least 4 games before he is able to return. So the Seahawks will not see him under center this weekend. As you mentioned, Skylar Thompson is going to be at the quarterback position. And we don't know if Jerome Baker is going to play in this game. Baker left in the first quarter of Sunday's win after re-aggravating his hamstring injury. Now, Mike Macdonald after the game seemed to think that he was going to be okay, and that it wasn't something that was going to make a prolonged absence for him. But Tyrese Knight went out and played pretty well in his first extended action. So we don't know if they're going to rush to get him back on the field. You know he's going to want to play against the only team that he had played for before signing with the Seahawks. There's that internal motivation, not necessarily that it's a revenge game, but I mean, the Dolphins did cut him. Baker was a cap casualty. So he's going to want to go out there and show them that he is a far better player than what Jordyn Brooks is, who was brought in really as one of the replacements at the linebacker position for him. So there's going to be that internal motivation. We'll see if he plays, but it's interesting because Brooks has played more snaps than what Baker has with the injury that Baker's had here. It's been 2 games, a small sample size. But Baker has nearly as many tackles. He has a fumble recovery, 2 pressures. They both have 2 pressures. They both have a pass breakup. Their stat lines are almost nearly identical, with the only differences being that Baker has a tackle for a loss. Brooks doesn't. Baker has a fumble recovery. Brooks doesn't. But otherwise, it almost looks like you're stealing the stat cards for the 2 guys so far. So it's going to be interesting to see who ends up standing out there. But I think when you're looking at this game, and we'll have more time to talk about this the next couple of days, but when you look at where this game is setting up, the Miami Dolphins brought in Calais Campbell, who is still a pretty solid player, even at the age of 38. He is still a guy that can get the job done. He's a mountain of man. Seattle fans, unfortunately, know him way too well from his days with the Arizona Cardinals when he dominated their offensive lines. To me, Connor Williams is the former Dolphin to watch in this game, because to this point, and look, I'm going to be screaming for patience here, because you're talking about a guy that is still less than 10 months removed from reconstructive knee surgery. The fact that he's been out there every snap the first 2 games and he's been able to get through the games, to me, that is a big plus for the Seahawks. And he has had his moments where he's played well, but he's also given up 4 pressures. He gave up a sack this last game. So it feels like he's still getting his legs literally underneath him right now, because he really didn't get any action in training camp in the preseason to speak of. So this has been his preseason and it's training camp these first 2 weeks. I want to see how Connor Williams handles this Dolphins front that is going to be missing some pieces, but they did add Calais Campbell. They did lose Christian Wilkins. There's some changes up there, but it's still a formidable front line that he is going to have to deal with a lot of guys that he is familiar with, that he used to play with.
Yeah, there's no question about it. I mean, that really, we're kind of putting the cart ahead of the horse a touch here, because of course on Wednesday we're going to be talking about all of the matchups that we love and think are fascinating in this particular football game. But that's one of the biggest ones, Corbin. I mean, obviously the Seahawks now have Connor Williams, and that has been a significant upgrade at the center position. You and I have both just kind of pounded the table now. It feels like for not only years, I mean, hell, it might be decades at this point, for the Seahawks to have some type of upgrade at the center position. And when you throw the ball as much as Mike McDaniels and the Miami Dolphins are looking to do, then you have to have stellar pass protection. And you certainly have to be able to provide some run blocking as well. And when you look at what the Miami Dolphins have been able to do, they have a free agent addition from the Tennessee Titans and Aaron Brewer, who has taken over at that center position for Connor Williams with the Miami Dolphins. So, and while, as you said, the Seahawks are hoping to see gradual improvement for Connor Williams, because they are understandably, recognizing the fact that he is coming off of the injury. He is surrounded by an entirely different team than what he has played with for the last couple of seasons. At the same time, you look at what is going on in Miami, and Aaron Brewer has played reasonably well, but certainly not at the level that Connor Williams has. And I would argue that the same thing is true at the linebacker position. Look, Jordyn Brooks is a good football player, but similar to what we saw in Seattle, it is an awful lot of tackles that are 3, 4, 5 yards past the line of scrimmage. He can rack up some tackles, but where are the big plays? And considering the fact that Seattle used the first round selection on him, Miami is made Jordyn Brooks a clear offseason priority for them and released, as you said, with Jerome Baker. I think that Seattle is looking like the better of the two teams at this point for these the switcheroo that the Seattle Seahawks and the Miami Dolphins have made at the center and linebacker positions.
Those will definitely be names that we're going to be talking about on tomorrow's show, because you know that the linebacker spots, and we know that Connor Williams at center, those are going to be areas that are going to be pointed out in key matchups, or at least we're going to make it sound like that's the case before we lead up to tomorrow's show. When we come back, look, we want to go full steam ahead to week 3, but it was a thrilling win over the Patriots in Foxborough. We got to have our last takeaways. It's Tell the Truth Tuesday. That is coming up next here on Locked On Seahawks. This episode is brought your way by LinkedIn Jobs. When you're hiring for your small business, you want to have as many top-tier candidates as possible in an interview. That's why you have to check out LinkedIn Jobs. LinkedIn Jobs is the tools to help find the right professionals for your team faster and for free. When I was a site manager, actually, I'm currently still a site manager at Seahawks on SI, LinkedIn Jobs is my go-to to post writing positions to land top candidates, and they made the process easy and seamless. LinkedIn isn't just another job board. LinkedIn has a vast network of more than 1 billion professionals, and the process is so easy. 86% of small businesses get a qualified candidate within 24 hours. LinkedIn knows that small businesses are wearing so many hats and might not have the time or resources to hire. Thankfully, LinkedIn is always looking for ways to make the process easier, including recently launching a feature that helps you write job descriptions, which makes the process even quicker. LinkedIn Jobs helps you find the qualified candidates you want to talk to faster. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/LockedInNFL. That's linkedin.com/LockedInNFL to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. This episode is also brought your way by our friends over at Game Time. You shouldn't have to skip a car payment when you buy tickets to your next big event. Game Time is the fast and easy way to buy all the tickets for sports, music, comedy, and theater near you. They've got killer last-minute deals, all-in prices, views from your seat, and their best price guarantee, making Game Time the place to take the guesswork out of buying tickets. Want to see the Seahawks in their second home game this upcoming Sunday against the Miami Dolphins? You can get seats at one of the loudest venues in the NFL in the lower bowl for under $75 right now. You don't have to break the budget to still get really good seats to see exciting talent as the Seahawks look to move to 3-0. Game Time has deals on tickets right at the day of the event, and the Game Time guarantee means you'll always get the very best price to write your own memories. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use the code LOCKEDON for $20 off your first purchase. Again, create an account and redeem the code LOCKEDON for $20 off. Download Game Time today. What time is it? It's game time. Welcome back to Tell the Truth Tuesday here on the Locked On Seahawks podcast. I'm your host, Corbin Smith. Glad to be joined, as always, by my co-host in crime, Rob Rang. And a special thanks to each and every one of the 12s out there. Thank you, as always, for making Locked On Seahawks your first listen 5 days a week. We greatly appreciate it. For your second listen, don't forget to check out the new Locked On NFL. 2 shows every single day. The madman Tyler Rowland kicks things off in the morning with a double shot of NFL espresso, and then make sure to stop by the barbershop with Tony Wiggins for some real NFL talk. Add in the Locked On local experts, and you get unprecedented insight, hot opinions, and detailed NFL breakdowns, all in 30 minutes. It's part of the new Locked On NFL twice a day with Tyler Rowland and Tony Wiggins. Make it your second listen. Locked On NFL on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts. It's Tell the Truth Tuesday, and as we do every week, look, we have to have a few last words of wisdom or a few last factoids to dish out coming out of the previous game, whether it's a win or loss. And luckily, we have not had a loss to deal with yet this season, knock on wood. Getting the victory Foxborough in overtime, 23-20 over the Patriots on Sunday. And Rob, look, we can't get everything out that we want to say on Monday Musings. So there's always a few things left to say. And I know on offense, we talked a lot about number 7 under center and how he relishes the chance to win games when games are on the line. But I know going into this show that maybe you just feel that he played better than you thought that you mentioned yesterday.
Yeah, there's no question about it. I mean, I was impressed by Geno Smith's performance watching the game live. After watching the All 22, I am that much more impressed. I think that this was an absolutely historical performance from Geno Smith. If you want to go back in time and just look at the way, say, for example, that Pro Football Focus graded him, the last time that they graded him this highly was in a game again not last year in 2023, solid season for Geno Smith, but was actually in 2022, and that was a Week 8 win at home against the Giants. But that was a game that was at home, so let's ignore that one. The one before that, excuse me, was Week 5. That was a loss on the road against the New Orleans Saints. But again, that was a road loss. So the last comparable game in which the Seahawks were on the road, in which Geno Smith was absolutely brilliant, in which Seattle eventually came out with a victory, was a game a couple of years ago, Corbin, one of the very favorite games of mine since you and I started working together. A Week 4 win on the road versus the Detroit Lions, a 48-45 point, or just a absolute barn burner of a football game. And just to put that in perspective, I mentioned before last time that the Seahawks played the Miami Dolphins, it was Russell Wilson and Chris Carson were kind of the leading playmakers for the Seahawks, and obviously they're no longer on the squad. Just to put this 48-45 game in perspective, it was Rashad Penny who was the Seahawks leading running back in that game, had 2 touchdowns, including essentially the game winner at the end there. Geno Smith was absolutely brilliant. Look, I can gush about the pinpoint accuracy that he showed, the fact that he was able to just kind of shuck off so many would-be sacks, still got sacked 3 times in this particular football game, but it was the touch, it was the velocity, it was the accuracy, it was the poise in the pocket that, to me, really was outstanding in this game. I think that it bears repeating. 33 of 44 in this particular game against the Patriots for 327 yards and a touchdown. But let's be real, there were 4 or 5 passes in that particular game that were drops. There was another where he just spiked the football. So really, Mike Macdonald said the same thing after the game, and since in his some of his interviews that he has done post game, Geno Smith was brilliant. He was the single biggest reason why the Seahawks escaped from Foxborough with the victory.
I think he's the biggest reason they're 2-0 at this point. I know there's other players that have done what they need to do in order for the Seahawks to win games. It feels like most of their stars have stepped up more than what they did last year. And that was something that we talked about in a few episodes last season, that the big names were not producing the way that you need them to. That has not been the case so far in these first couple of games, and that speaks to the coaching staff putting their guys in position to maximize their talent. I got to be the pessimist again. And look, actually, I'm going to take this from a positive perspective. And we talked yesterday on Overreaction Monday about where Noah Fant stands right now. And I'm not saying that Noah Fant needs to be sent out to a local pasture field and just cut off the team. I'm not saying that. But what I am saying is it's time for a shakeup. And I think it's time to see what A.J. Barner can do in a more extensive role. And the reason that I am saying this, going back and watching the All-22 a second and third time, the number of positive blocks that A.J. Barner made in the run and passing game was 5 times Noah Fant's. Noah Fant got blown up. And look, going against Keon White is a really unfair one-on-one matchup. But he got blown up on the 4th and 1 play. That single-handedly destroyed it. The rest of the offensive line actually blocked pretty well on that play. But Zach Charbonnet couldn't keep going his track. He had to try to cut back, and then there was an unblocked defender that blew him up. And it was because Fant missed that block. Fant had 2 drops. He didn't do much in the first game. It just feels like he and Draymond Jones are 2 players that aren't living up to the contracts that they have. I think you've got to do something to light a fire under Noah Fant. And I think the way to do that is say, all right, we're going to start A.J. Barner this week. And if A.J. Barner plays well, you might not get your starting job back. The Seahawks have the wiggle room to get out of that contract next year with Noah Fant without much harm. You need to earn that contract and earn that second year of that deal. And right now he has not done it. So I think it is absolutely time for a shakeup at that tight end spot. See what you've got in A.J. Barner. Heck, give Brady Russell some more snaps. He's making things happen in the little bit he's playing on offense. They're playing him at fullback some. But you got to do something there And maybe that'll get Noah Fant going some, but he just has had a really rough start in all facets to open the season. I think you got to do something to get him going, and it isn't just feeding him 80% of the reps. You need to start putting some heat on him with some competition there in the season, see what the rookie A.J. Barner can do. Let's flip gears to the defensive side of the football. And, we talked so much about Leonard Williams yesterday. We talked about Byron Murphy II, and obviously both of them had great games. But going back and watching the game, big number 97, and Pro Football Focus and I are going to have a big disagreement here because they had Jonathan Hankins as the second worst graded defender on the team. I don't know what game they were watching, but I thought number 97 was extremely disruptive in this football game.
Yeah, there's no question about it. I mean, he had 3 tackles. He had a tackle for loss. I mean, he's a nose guard. I mean, you're not expecting this to be a guy who is going to be able to create pressure and create consistent tackles for loss or sacks the way that Leonard Williams did. Look, Leonard Williams was spectacular. We talked about this in yesterday's show, Corbin. He had 4 tackles officially, 1.5 sacks, as well as a tackle for loss. You can make the argument that he was the best player on the defensive side of the ball for the Seahawks. And then certainly Byron Murphy. I mean, how exciting were the flashes that number 91 showed? I mean, technically he had 4 tackles. He only had half a sack and a tackle for loss, but my goodness, he was disruptive. But in the middle, it was Jonathan Hankins. I mean, big number 97. He's listed 330 pounds. He's a little bit more than that. But I saw some plays in which he was pursuing very far down the field. I mean, 15, 20 yards. You don't see a lot of guys of that size who are willing to pursue that far. And as far as just kind of eating up blockers, which is, of course, the role that you were asking a traditional nose guard to do, he was spectacular. So, yeah, as you said, Pro Football Focus sometimes with their rankings. Look, I get it. Some of the skill position rankings I actually think are very well done. But when it comes to the line of scrimmage, I think that the PFF needs to have a T, as in, what the heck are you watching? Because Jonathan Hankins was absolutely spectacular in this game. Again, a huge role in Seattle's victory against a team that wanted to run the ball as much as the New England Patriots do. And until the Seahawks get back, say, a Cameron Young or some of the other big body defensive linemen, look, Jarran Reed was arguably statistically Seattle's best interior defensive lineman. He had 6 tackles in last week's game against the New England Patriots. But like Jonathan Hankins, Jay Reed and Jonathan Hankins both are 2 guys that were kind of anonymous in that they didn't create the big plays behind the line of scrimmage that are going to get the announcer screaming their names. But if you watch from a defensive perspective and you understand how if you can't hold up at the point of attack, you're going to wind up being 31st in the NFL in run defense the way the Seahawks were a year ago. Jonathan Hankins and Jay Reed, I thought were one of the kind of low key, to use a kid's expression, low key reasons why Seattle, again, emerged from Foxborough with the victory.
Yeah, you were mentioning some of those impact plays, and obviously they're important, but I think there are certain position groups where being a box score vulture doesn't necessarily make for the best analysis. I think interior defensive linemen, interior offensive linemen. I mean, offensive linemen, you're not going to find box score stats anyway, unless you're looking at advanced metrics on pressures and sacks given up. But defensive linemen in the middle, they do so many things that aren't going to show in the box score. But I want to talk about another player that is doing a lot that is not showing up in the box score, to the point where I don't want to make it sound like I'm saying shuffle the lineup all over the place, because that's not really where it stands. I'm just thinking 2 different position groups, and it's the 2 highest paid players that are not producing right now worth their money. Draymond Jones had a nice tackle for loss on the second drive of this game, and I don't remember seeing him on the field the rest of the game, except for a couple of times he lost contain. I mean, it has been rough watching his performance these first 2 games, and I think he's still trying to get back healthy from that hamstring injury. So maybe we need to have a little bit more patience there. But Derek Hall, every time that I watch number 58, the numbers are not there. Like, you're not seeing a bunch of sacks, you're not seeing a bunch of tackles for loss, but that guy is creating so many opportunities for his teammates. Leonard Williams, his full sack that he got in a bull rush happened because Jacoby Brissett was trying to step in the pocket because, here comes number 58 screaming around the edge. Derek Hall is playing really good football. So I'm going to make the argument right now. you need to start him with Boye Mafe. And I know some people are going to say, well, those are two similar players. No, they're not. If you watch the film, Derek Hall is much more of a power-based player. And I like the way he's taking on blocks off the edge this year. I love the way that he's taken on tight ends when they come over and wham blocks. We saw in the preseason. It's translating to the regular season. I want to see both these guys in the field as much as possible when Uchenna Nwosu's not available. If Nwosu's not playing this week, I think you start Derek Hall, and he got a bump this week, Rob. He played 23% more snaps than he did in week 1, and that was with being out of the game for a little while, being evaluated for a concussion. So Mike Macdonald already seems to be feeling that out a little bit, like, I'm going to play this kid a little bit more. I would like to see him and Boye Mafe be a 1-2 punch, and then when you get Nwosu back, those three, and maybe that brings out more out of Draymond Jones. Maybe it's that fire he needs lit underneath him. But I think it is time to start Derek Hall. I think he is playing at a really high level. I love what I'm seeing. I have loved what I've seen since early August. The guy, since a pad, come on, just looks like a different player. I want to see a more expanded role. Real quick, we have to go quickly through this last one in special teams. But I know that on special teams, we got to make sure we give some love to those guys. You want to talk about a switcheroo, 180-degree switch from week 1 to week 2. Nobody did it better than the special teams group for the Seahawks.
Yeah, I think that you could make an argument that whether it be Jason Myers at the kicker position, who was 3 for 3, of course, and in this game on field goals, obviously had the game winner in overtime, had the game, or had the kick that put the game into overtime, 2 and 2 on PATs. If you want to go to D. Williams, who I argued was going to be Seattle Special Teams Player of the Year, obviously an abysmal start to the season with the muff punt, the 9-yard line against the Denver Broncos in the home opener, but had a couple of splashy punt returns, a long of 23 yards as a punt returner. I mean, 23 yards as a punt returner is spectacular. Laviska Shenault had 3 for 74 in the as the kick returner in the home opener, but it also had a solid performance in week 2 against the New England Patriots. And then finally, Michael Dixon. To me, that is one of the real storylines, because again, in a game like this one, that was so much about just where you are on the field and just kind of playing that battle, for a 53.8 yard per punt average. He had his first touchback of the season. He had his first, inside the 20-yard line. He had a long of 61, so almost 10 yards longer than he had against the Denver Broncos. I mean, almost to a man, Corbin. The special teams unit was better. And then, oh, by the way, you also had Julian Love blocking the field goal that actually led to the Seahawks.
I thought you were going to wrap up your analysis. I'm like, you didn't even mention the best play that was made.
Exactly. And that's the point, is that, as we said, I mean, it was better almost to a man. And then you had the cherry on top that was Julian Love's block kick. So, and again, I think that it's easy to just kind of wipe away the special teams performance. But I thought in a game as close as this one, and obviously it was an overtime victory on the road, then special teams deserves a little bit of credit.
When we come back, unfortunately, we got to flip the script. I'd love to talk about this win some more, but it's on to the Miami Dolphins. Week 3, Lumen Field. What's new with the Dolphins? Unfortunately, there's a lot that's brand new that we're going to be diving into with Seattle's upcoming opponent as we take a look at what's new, as we do each and every week. Make sure you come back and listen here on the Locked On Seahawks podcast. This episode is brought your way by our friends over at FanDuel. You've heard us talk a lot about FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. We have something a little different for you. Now through September 22nd, all FanDuel customers can bet $5 and get 3 weeks of free trial of NFL Sunday Ticket from YouTube and YouTube TV. With a YouTube TV-based plan, you'll be able to watch every regular season Sunday afternoon out-of-market game. All you need is a Google account and a current form of payment, and you can cancel at any time. Bet on everything from DK Metcalf scoring 1 or more touchdowns against the Dolphins, or Jack Smith and Jigba being the first player in Sunday's game to get a 30-plus yard reception. Just throw in a $5 bet, and you'll get a 3-week free trial to NFL Sunday Ticket from YouTube and YouTube TV. Just visit FanDuel.com and download America's #1 sportsbook. Welcome back to the Locked On Seahawks podcast, Tuesday edition. I'm your host, Corbin Smith. Glad to be joined, as always, by my co-host in crime, Rob Rang. And a special thanks to each and every one of the 12s out there. Thank you, as always, for making Locked On Seahawks your first listen 5 days a week. We greatly appreciate it. It is on to week 3. The Seahawks returning to Lumen Field for their second home game, and they'll be taking on the Miami Dolphins. And this was a game, Rob, that we had circled back when the schedules came out in mid-May. This was one of the games we were most excited about. And look, the Dolphins are not going to fold. They're going to come out to Seattle. They're going to bring their talented players that are still healthy. Mike Macdonald can coach with the best of them. He can scheme it up. He knows the Seahawks well. He's coached against Mike Macdonald's defense several times when it was Ravens versus Dolphins. So there's going to be familiarity there, even though these are two teams that only play every 4 years. But not having Tua Tagovailoa under center, that really puts a damper on this game, because we were looking forward to seeing how this defense for the Seahawks are going to fare against an established star caliber quarterback, which they have not faced yet to this point, and they're not going to in week 3, with Skylar Thompson now being the starter and Tyler Huntley being the backup after being signed off the Ravens practice squad.
Yeah, and that's obviously the big storyline here is you go from a quarterback who signed one of the most lucrative deals in NFL history to a guy in Skylar Thompson who is, a couple of years into the NFL. He was a 7th-round pick by the Miami Dolphins out of Kansas State a couple of years ago. Look, Skylar Thompson is more of a Bo Nix style than a Tua Tagovailoa pass the ball from the pocket style. So this is going to be a completely different offense. This is a system now that is going to ask the quarterback to kind of run around and make some big plays. But I think everybody is going to naturally focus their attention at the quarterback. And I think where the Seahawks have to focus their attention is just recognizing that regardless of who is throwing the ball, the Miami Dolphins still have absolutely lethal speed. And Tyreek Hill, Jalen Waddle, and at the running back position with Devon Achane. Those 3 guys can change this game in a blink. And so, as you said, I mean, we were excited about this particular matchup because, look, you want to see a defense that is humming the way that the Seahawks defense is playing right now. You want to see the best against the best, but at the same time, I also think that this remains a very formidable challenge because the Seahawks have not faced any type of straight line speed like the Miami Dolphins have. So, I think that this is one of those games, Corbin, where you have to kind of be careful what you wish for because the Seahawks have struggled with backup quarterbacks in the past. And so they had better make sure that they are on their P's and Q's because as good as those corners have played, as good as those safeties have played, again, they have not faced the vertical threats that the Miami Dolphins are going to be bringing to Seattle this weekend.
Yeah, you had to bring up the Colt McCoy rule or the Andy Dalton rule. I'm just thinking about some of those established veteran backups that have beaten the Seahawks multiple times over the years. The Seahawks were happy to see Colt McCoy go to the broadcast booth and not sign with a division rival here at this stage of his career. But nonetheless, Skylar Thompson has made some plays. He's a different style quarterback, as you mentioned. Not a guy that's going to chuck the ball downfield very often. That is not his game. And so that does mitigate some of the strengths for the Dolphins, but it feels like Mike Macdonald is going to try to find other ways that he can get the ball to his speedsters, let Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle create after the catch, use his running backs in the passing game more. They're going to have ways that they can try to get this offense to be functional, even though they're not going to have the deep threat that they normally would have with Tagovailoa under center. And Thompson certainly is a much different style quarterback. But this is a team that is just much different looking than what they were even a year ago. Very few teams that changed as much as the Dolphins. And some of these were their own decisions. They just realized we can't pay everyone. They let a couple of quality offensive linemen. Williams, obviously the Seahawks now have at center. He was coming off an ACL injury. They decided to go with Aaron Brewer instead, so we're to see a different center. Their defensive line, Christian Wilkins, one of their best players, goes to the Raiders for $100 million. They lost another offensive lineman in Robert Hunt on a huge contract to the Panthers. So in the trenches particularly, they have had a lot of turnover. And then there's been some injuries they've been dealing with up front on both sides of the ball as well. So it's been a lot of moving parts. It's nice to have a guy like Calais Campbell that you can bring it up the street that still can play at a pretty high level. So the Dolphins have been able to weather that storm personnel-wise. But they have definitely had a lot of changes in the trenches. They've got a new linebacker, as we mentioned, in Jordyn Brooks. Xavier Howard, who was their other starting corner, is no longer in town. He's not on the team right now. So Jalen Ramsey's running mate. Hey, they've moved on. They got Kendall Fuller now, the established veteran back there, playing at the other outside cornerback spot. This is a team that is trying to break in a lot of new pieces, particularly on the defensive side of the football. And you have seen some of those growing pains here in the first couple of weeks for the Miami Dolphins.
Yeah, you absolutely have. And again, you kind of open the door to the defensive side of the ball. And so that's where I wanted to kind of focus in on here, because, of course, the easiest way to mitigate the speed that the Dolphins have on offense is just to run the ball right down the opponent's throat. That's exactly the strategy that New England Patriots try to do against Seattle. And so that is exactly the strategy that I think that the Seahawks are going to try to do against the Dolphins. Again, look, you have a spectacular player, arguably a Hall of Fame player in Calais Campbell at that defensive tackle position. And as as imposing as he is, I mean, he is a 6'7" kind of a guy. He's going to be able to knock down some passes and things like that. But for the same things that we talked about before with Stone Forsythe, the right tackle position, when you're that tall, it's hard to play with any type of leverage. So you and I have both been critical of Seattle's interior offensive line play, the guards and the centers. This is a game where you should be able to create a little bit of a push in the running game. Allow Jordyn Brooks to, collect another dozen tackles, pad that resume. As long as none of them are behind the line of scrimmage, then I think that the Seahawks are going to be okay in that regard. You mentioned Xavier Howard at the cornerback position, a good safety the Dolphins brought in Jordan Poyer from another AFC East rival, the Buffalo Bills. But still, this does feel like a defense that the Seahawks should be able to create some big plays on. I don't know that they're going to be able to duplicate the 10 receptions to DK Metcalf, and I believe it was 12 receptions for Jackson Smith and Jake, but I do think that you are going to see the Seahawks be able to run the ball much more effectively against Miami than they did against the Patriots.
One thing that I am excited about with this game, and this is not even looking at matchups yet, but this is going to be a game that features two of the highest graded defenders in this draft from Seattle's personnel department, because the Dolphins have Chop Robinson, the edge rusher from Penn State. And I can tell you definitively now that Chop Robinson, it was not a mirage that they had interest in him. They loved Chop Robinson's skill set, his athleticism coming out of Penn State. If they did not get Byron Murphy II and they want to still go defense, Chop Robinson might have been the number 2 guy on their board based on the discussions that I've had. So this is a guy that John Schneider and the scouting department were fired up about. He's playing quite a bit already for the Miami Dolphins. He's going to bring a lot of juice off the edge. So that is a guy to keep an eye on if you're Geno Smith in this football game. So I'm excited about the young talent that we're going to be seeing on the defensive line with Byron Murphy II as well as Chop Robinson. As always, you can follow me on X and Threads at Corbin Smith NFL. You can follow Rob at Rob Rang. Make sure to subscribe to Locked On Seahawks on YouTube and wherever you listen to your podcast to make sure you don't miss a single episode. Coming up tomorrow, hey, guess what? It's Matchup Wednesday, and we already have given some nice little appetizers for some of the matchups, the positional battles that we're going to be diving into. But as always, looking forward to breaking down the top 6 position battles to watch in Week 3. Make sure you're listening in and enjoy the rest of your Tuesday. Go Hawks.